The wind howled across the jagged ridges of Aura, an alien world where the air was thin and the sky a perpetual storm of swirling purple clouds. On the edge of a cliff, ex-soldier, ex-engineer, now a fugitive, crouched in the shadow of a massive rock formation. He adjusted the lens of his long-range rifle with practiced precision, his breath steady, his pulse controlled. The target, the leader of a separatist faction on Aura, a group who had once helped in his darkest hour but now stood in the way of his only chance for survival. She was ruthless, a force to be reckoned with. And now, standing alone on a hill 5 kilometers away, she had made herself the perfect target. His rifle, an advanced human-made piece of engineering, was designed to make the impossible shot a reality. The reticle blinked twice on its back as she walked, unaware of the danger lurking behind her. The familiar hiss of the scope's automated calculations began, the data feeding into the crosshairs. His hand hovered over the trigger. 30 seconds to optimal alignment, the soft voice of his AI whispered in his ear. The rain began to fall, heavy droplets that clung to his face like the weight of his past. His mind raced. He'd been running for days, hunted by both alien factions and his own government for crimes he didn't commit. This shot, this kill, was supposed to be his redemption. His thumb brushed the trigger. Then nothing. The scope's projected trajectory was 30 seconds too slow, an error in the AI's calculations. The moment the rifle's mechanism kicked, his heart skipped, shifted. Too late. A glint of metal flashed in the periphery of his vision. He turned just in time to see a shadow dart toward him, like a dark wraith. The blade flashed, sharp as the mountains that surrounded them. A sickening, quiet laugh broke the silence, echoing in his ears. "Missed me," his voice came from behind him, too close, almost inside his skin. The scent of blood and filled his nostrils. He had no time to react. He whirled, the barrel of the rifle now a mere shield against her impending strike. The world seemed to move in slow motion. Her blade, long, slender, and gleaming with a pale violet hue, was already inches from his throat. Dove to the side, but not fast enough. The blade cut into his side with a searing pain. His breath caught as he collapsed to the ground, a flood of red warmth spreading across his jacket. His vision blurred. The AI in its mechanical coldness repeated over and over, "You're bleeding. Immediate medical attention required." But the bleeding wasn't his primary concern. The danger was right in front of him. Stood over him, the blade held in both hands. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, met his with a look of pure amusement. She was toying with him now. "Did you think you could escape this life?" she asked, her voice dripping with venom. "Did you believe your petty human tricks could save you?" Clenched his teeth against the pain, staring up at her with defiance. "I don't need tricks. I need to survive." She leaned down, pressing the blade against his throat. "You'll die here, alone, just as you deserve." But something in his eyes, a spark of defiance, of purpose, made her pause. She studied him for a long moment as if weighing something unknown. And then she stepped back. "You're lucky," she said, "but that doesn't mean I won't enjoy this." The storm raged louder now, crashing against the rock formations. The air was electric with tension. Struggled to breathe, to move, to react, but the world was fatting. His body screamed at him, but his mind stayed sharp. His pulse raced as the rumble of engines grew louder. His body, stiff with pain from the wound in his side, forced him to push through the dizziness and struggle to stay conscious. He just survived an impossible strike, but now the real battle began, one that would test not only his survival instincts, but the fragile alliances he had built over the years. The storm winds carried the sound of approaching ships, their engines cutting through the thick rain like thunder. His thoughts flashed to his backup plan, the signal device in his hand. It was meant to call in reinforcements, a tactical group he had arranged weeks before. They had promised to be there when he needed them most. But as his eyes fell upon, the flicker of hope in his chest began to wither. She had turned her back on him, her back straight and her posture relaxed. A cruel smile tugged at her lips, but there was something else in her eyes, calculating, deliberate. She knew something he didn't. The sound of the ships grew louder, felt the tension tighten around his chest, and his thoughts scrambled for an explanation. The ships were too close, too quick to be his allies. He hadn't been able to send a clear signal, so how was it possible? Without warning, the roar of engines broke through the pounding rain as a shuttle descended, its heavy landing gear scraping across the rocky ground. The hatch opened, and stomach dropped. A pair of human soldiers in full battle gear stepped out. "Sergeant," the lead soldier called, his voice cutting through the wind. His heart stopped. He recognized the man, but the sight of him was like a gut punch. "Johnson," whispered, "what the hell are you doing here?" Johnson had once been part of Squad, back when everything had been different, when loyalty was supposed to mean something. But the man's eyes were cold now, void of recognition or warmth. He barely glanced at before turning his attention to. "We've got your back," Johnson said flatly. "Let's finish this." His body went rigid. His instincts screamed to fight, but his wound was already taking its toll. He was outnumbered, and if this was a trap, there was no way out. Turned back toward him, her expression a mixture of amusement and pity. "Did you really think they were coming for you?" she asked, her voice laced with venom. "Your reinforcements are mine now. Your government signed a deal long ago. You were expendable." The truth hit him like a punch to the gut. The people he had trusted, the ones who had promised to pull him out of this hellhole, had made a deal with the enemy. Felt a bitter taste rise in his throat. The soldiers behind Johnson were already forming a perimeter around him, the steel of their guns gleaming under the storm's flashes. "You were always a tool," Johnson said, stepping forward. "A weapon to use, nothing more. The government knew what you were really capable of." His mind raced, trying to understand what had gone wrong. He had trusted these people, bled for them, fought for them. And now it was clear that his past, the very government he thought had abandoned him, had sealed his fate long before he ever pulled the trigger on. His hand hovered near her blade, but she didn't draw it. "You're more useful alive," she said, the edge in her voice gone, replaced by a certain cold calculation. "You'll help me build my weapon, help me turn the tide of this war, and then when the time is right, you'll be a martyr." The words hit like a slap. He was nothing more than a pawn in a larger game, a weapon to be wielded by both sides. He had no choice, no escape. His mind churned with options, none of them good, none of them even remotely in his control. Johnson and his men closed in, forming a tight circle around him. He gritted his teeth against the growing dizziness from his side wound. The storm's wind picked up, carrying with it the metallic scent of blood and ozone. Took a step toward him. "One last chance," she said softly, her eyes narrowing. "Join me or die." A surge of anger and desperation rose in his chest. His mind flashed to his allies, the ones he had left behind, the ones who still believed in him. He couldn't let them down, not like this, not while the fate of an entire planet hung in the balance. With a final surge of strength, lunged forward, breaking the circle. He tackled one of the soldiers to the ground and reached for his sidearm. The moment he grabbed the weapon, a sharp pain shot through his wound, and he nearly collapsed. His voice rang out, sharp and commanding, "Stop him." But didn't stop. He fired twice, hitting the soldier closest to him. The man collapsed with a grunt, his body crumpling to the ground. The world around spun as he struggled to stay upright. His vision blurred as he fired another shot, this one missing its mark. Johnson's men closed in fast, their weapons trained on him. His heart pounded in his chest as the ship descended through the storm, its engines roaring like thunder in the distance. His mind raced, the confusion of the past few minutes settling into a sharp, painful clarity. He had just fired on his own comrades. He had just killed a man he had once served beside. Now he was facing an unknown faction with no guarantee of survival. But as the ship touched down with a heavy thud, the soldiers surrounding him hesitated. They looked up, their eyes wide with uncertainty. The ship's hull was covered in dark, almost imperceptible markings, and its design was unlike anything had seen before, sleek and military, yet tailored for covert operations. It was human-made, but not from any faction he recognized. The door to the ship hissed open, revealing a figure silhouetted against the storm. A tall woman in a combat suit stepped out, her face obscured by a helmet. But her stance, confident, measured, spoke volumes. The soldiers around lowered their weapons, and for a split second, the tension in the air seemed to dissolve. The woman stepped forward. She said, her voice calm but authoritative, "Get up, you're coming with us." Was too stunned to respond immediately. Who was this woman, and why was she so sure he'd comply? His instincts screamed at him to run, to fight, but his body refused to cooperate. His side burned with each breath, and the adrenaline was starting to fade. His grip on his sidearm tightened, and he forced himself to his knees. "Who the hell are you?" rasped, his voice hoarse. "What do you want with me?" The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she tilted her head and regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and mild amusement, as if he were a puzzle she was trying to solve. After a long pause, she finally spoke again. "My name is Captain," she extended her hand to, though he didn't take it. "And as of now, you work for me." Behind her, the shuttle's door remained open, revealing the interior, a state-of-the-art command center filled with monitors and flashing indicators. The ship hummed with the energy of powerful machinery. Didn't know it yet, but he had just walked into something far larger than anything he had ever imagined. Before he could respond, the storm above them grew louder, and the tension among the soldiers spiked. "We need to move now," said, her voice firm. "Is too close." His head snapped up. "She's already alerted her forces," continued, her voice calm and calculating. "She has no intention of letting you leave here alive. You're either with us or you're dead." His mind spun, trying to process everything. This new faction, this captain, was offering him a way out, but at what cost? And what exactly was her game? Was this just another play in the larger war, or did she have her own agenda? He barely registered Sn's next words, his thoughts still clouded by the sudden appearance of this new group, when he noticed the sharp sound of footfalls behind him. The soldiers who had once surrounded him now stood at attention, eyes darting nervously between him and the ship. "We need to go, now," repeated more urgently this time. Made a split-second decision. His side ached, but he wasn't going to get any answers here, not with soldiers closing in and his old allies betraying him. He pushed himself to his feet, wincing at the pain, and staggered toward the ship. He didn't trust, not yet, but at this point, survival was all that mattered. As he stepped inside, he noticed the ship's crew, a small, tight-knit group of soldiers and technicians. Each one wore the same dark uniforms, and they all shared a look of hardened determination. There was no sign of mercy here, only cold calculation. Took a seat near the back, leaning against the cold metal wall, trying to steady his breathing. Took a seat in the front, her back straight and her hands clasped before her. "Who are you really?" asked, his voice low but filled with suspicion. Didn't look at him immediately. Instead, she studied the ship's controls before answering. "We are part of the human resistance," she said, as if the words meant something. "Our goal is simple, to end this war." Narrowed his eyes. "And you need me to do that? I'm just an ex-soldier, a mechanic. I'm no one's savior." Met his gaze for the first time, her eyes cold but piercing. "You're more than you think," she paused. "The technology you've built, the weapons you've engineered, they're exactly what we need. And she's more dangerous than you can imagine. She's the key to everything. You have to help us destroy her before it's too late." His mind was still reeling. He had no idea what was talking about. But one thing was clear, the war wasn't as black and white as he'd once thought. The ship took off, its engines roaring to life as it broke through the atmosphere and into the dense clouds. Watched as the storm raged beneath them, the flashes of lightning illuminating the chaos below. But as the ship ascended, so did his uncertainty. The more he learned, the more questions he had. The hum of the ship's engines vibrated through the metal walls, a constant reminder that they were on the run. The storm outside had subsided slightly, but the danger was far from over. His forces were closing in and could feel the weight of the mission on his shoulders. Every move they made now felt like it was a step toward either salvation or certain death. Inside the resistance ship, the atmosphere was tense. Remained at the helm, her eyes glued to the instruments, tracking their movements. The rest of the crew, though seemingly competent, were all business. But there was one member who caught attention, the alien scientist. "Doctor." She was unlike the others. Where the soldiers were hardened by battle, his demeanor was calm, almost serene, her blue skin glowing faintly under the ship's lights. She was an alien, but her race was unfamiliar to, a species that seemed more intellectual than combative, with large, violet eyes that never seemed to stop calculating. Her mind was sharp, and her gaze never missed a detail. She had introduced herself shortly after was brought aboard. "I am Doctor, the ship's engineer and scientist," she had said with a soft voice, though there was a quiet power behind it. "I specialize in energy systems and advanced weaponry." As the ship's crew went about their tasks approached, her presence oddly calming amidst the chaos. "You're a mechanic, right?" she asked, her violet eyes gleaming with curiosity. "I've heard stories of your work, impressive to say the least." Didn't respond immediately. He didn't want to be drawn into any unnecessary conversations, especially when the mission ahead was so uncertain. but there was something about's quiet demeanor that made him think twice. "You heard wrong," muttered, looking out the viewport at the swirling clouds beneath them. "I'm just a guy trying to survive, not some hero." Smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but there's more to survival than you know." Glanced at her, unsure of what she meant. But before he could ask, she added, "We need your help with something. There's a weapon being developed by faction, something that could change the course of this war. A weapon that could obliterate entire cities with a single strike." His blood ran cold at the mention of a weapon. He knew all too well how devastating war could be, but he hadn't anticipated this. What kind of weapon? His eyes darkened. "A fusion weapon. It draws from a highly unstable energy source that's native to this planet. We've been studying it, but we don't have the means to neutralize it. That's where you come in." Was taken aback, me. "Your engineering expertise, you understand energy systems better than anyone." Gaze grew more intense. "If we don't stop this weapon from being activated, we'll not only win the war, she will destroy everything in her path." His mind reeled. The weight of her words settled heavily on his chest. He had been running from the past, from his failures, from the very people who had turned their backs on him. And now, here he was, being asked to fight for something bigger than himself, bigger than his survival. The realization hit him like a shockwave. "You want me to build a weapon to stop her?" he asked, incredulous. "That's your plan?" Nodded, unflinching. "Not a weapon, a shield, a mechanism to disable the fusion core before it can go online. We're going to need you to rewire the energy conduits, stabilize the reactor, and create." His gaze flicked to the rest of the crew. He didn't know them, he didn't trust them, but they were all counting on him now. The pressure was mounting, and he could feel it deep in his bones. His hands clenched into fists, the familiar feeling of dread creeping up his spine. "I don't know if I can do this." His voice was barely above a whisper, as if he was confessing a secret he had kept for far too long. His eyes softened, the usual calculation in them replaced by something else, compassion. "You can. I've seen your work. You've built devices far more complex than this. This is just one more challenge for you to overcome." The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. For the first time in a long while, felt like he wasn't alone. He wasn't just a weapon. He was a person with a purpose, something he hadn't felt in years. But the truth was undeniable. If he failed, it wouldn't just be his life on the line. It would be the lives of everyone on this planet. The ship rocked violently as the alarms blared louder, filling the small interior with a sense of impending doom. His grip tightened around the seat he had braced himself against. The familiar sound of weapons fire echoed from outside the hull, shaking the entire ship. He barely had time to process the situation before his voice came through the intercom, sharp and commanding. "All hands to battle stations. We're taking fire from his fleet." His heart skipped a beat. He had no time to second-guess himself anymore. His survival instincts kicked in, pushing him into motion despite the lingering pain from his side wound. The ship's interior was chaos as crew members scrambled to their positions. The small band of resistance fighters was ready for whatever threw at them, but this wasn't just a battle for territory. It was a fight for their lives. "We need you in the engineering bay now," called, her voice steady but urgent. Without a word, bolted toward the rear of the ship, following her orders instinctively. As he passed the crew, he saw the fear in their eyes, fear that wasn't directed at the enemy, but at the unknown fate they were all heading toward. He entered the engineering bay, where was already working furiously on the ship's energy systems. A series of flashing lights indicated the shields were down, and the ship was taking more direct hits. Was on her feet, her hands flying over the panels, trying to stabilize the energy grid while the ship shuddered from the external assault. "We've got less than 5 minutes before the next wave hits. I need your help to reroute power to the shields," shouted over the clamor of the battle. Took a deep breath and moved toward her. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He was needed not just to survive, but to act. His mind, usually so calm under pressure, raced as he examined the ship's power systems. He knew how this worked. The wiring, the circuits, the connections, it was all so familiar, and yet today the stakes were higher than ever before. As he worked alongside, rerouting power to the shields, glanced over his shoulder toward the viewports. He could see flashes of light in the sky, the unmistakable sign of laser fire and explosions. His fleet was relentless. "The next round of fire will be the one that decides this," murmured, sweat beginning to bead on her forehead. If we don't get those shields back online, we'll be sitting ducks. Nodded grimly, continuing his work. He knew there was no room for mistakes. Every second that passed brought them closer to disaster. Suddenly, the ship lurched again and the lights flickered, casting long shadows across the engineering bay. The power surge was evident now. Something wasn't right. His mind raced. He called urgently. The conduits are overloaded. We're pushing the power grid too hard. If we don't stabilize it, we'll blow the whole system. His face went pale as she checked the diagnostics. Damn it, you're right. We're drawing too much energy and the system can't handle it. If we overload the grid anymore, we'll have an internal meltdown. His hands worked faster, desperate to stabilize the systems. He knew exactly what had to be done, but there was a risk. If he rerouted too much power too quickly, it could cause a backlash, a catastrophic failure. We don't have a choice, he said through gritted teeth. We need to manually bypass the overload circuits. If we do it slowly, we might have a chance. Hesitated, her eyes narrowing with doubt, but then nodded. Do it. We don't have time to second-guess ourselves. His hands moved with practiced precision, his mind focused on the task at hand. The hum of the ship's systems mixed with the distant rumble of weapons fire as he worked to reroute the power, his body moving in sync with the ship's rhythms. Every click of the switches, every adjustment of the circuits, brought them closer to stability. The ship shuddered again, its focus tightened. The next barrage would be their last chance. They had to be ready. Shields are coming back online, said, a flicker of hope in his voice as he checked the system's status. But we're still taking heavy fire, said, her voice tense. We need more time. Turned back to the main console, sweat dripping down his face as he worked furiously to maintain the power balance. But the ship's alarms blared again, signaling a new wave of incoming fire. Brace for impact, his voice echoed through the intercom. A deafening explosion rocked the ship, sending sprawling to the floor. The walls groaned under the pressure. Shields at 30%, a crew member shouted from the communications station. His heart raced, he had to act and fast. His mind immediately went to the core of the problem, the energy grid. They needed to buy themselves more time, but there was only one way to do that. Yelled, pulling himself back up. If we power down the auxiliary systems, we can redistribute that energy to the shields. His eyes widened. It's risky. The auxiliary systems are critical to the ship's survival. We have no choice, shouted over the noise, desperation seeping into his voice. If we don't, we're dead, all of us. Looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty, but she knew he was right. Do it, she commanded. His hands moved swiftly, his focus absolute as he shut down the non-essential systems. He felt the pressure of time pushing him forward, but there was something else. He could feel it in his bones. They were so close, so damn close. The next hit could destroy everything, or it could be the moment that tipped the scales in their favor. Another explosion rocked the ship, but this time the shields held firm. Shields at 70%, the communications officer announced. Let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. It's working, said, her voice quiet but relieved. For now, replied, wiping the sweat from his brow, but there was no time to rest. They had only bought themselves a few minutes. The intercom crackled again. His fleet is closing in fast. We've got one shot at this. Everyone brace for the final strike. Stood tall, his gaze fixed on the battle unfolding outside. This was it, the moment that would define the outcome of the war. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for everything, everything he had lost and everything he hoped to save. The tension on the ship was palpable. The cold, metallic hum of the engines echoed through the halls, but the noise of battle outside drowned out all but the most urgent thoughts. Stood at the ship's viewport, watching the massive fleet of ships bearing down on them. His pulse was a steady drumbeat in his ears, the weight of his decisions settling heavily in his chest. He could feel the heat of the moment radiating through the crew as they prepared for their final push. Had seen soldiers face death before, but this was different. This wasn't just about them. This wasn't about surviving a battle. This was the last chance to stop a cataclysmic weapon from destroying everything, everything that remained of Aura. The ship's bridge was a frenzy of motion as barked orders to the crew, her face set in stone. Despite the storm of fire outside, she maintained her composure, her eyes never wavering from the tactical readouts on the screen. We're down to the final shield reserves, his voice rang out cold and calm. We've got one shot, one chance to end this. His eyes narrowed. We need to disable the fusion reactor. If we don't, they'll launch the weapon. I know that's what's coming. Standing by his side, nodded gravely. That's what we've been working towards, but the way we're going to stop it, it's not just a technical challenge anymore. It's a decision of sacrifice. His heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Didn't meet his eyes immediately. She seemed hesitant, as if the weight of what she was about to say had finally caught up with her. There's in the reactor system. If we don't disable it, the power buildup will explode upon shutdown, destroying everything in a massive radius. Even if we succeed, we may not survive it. The silence that followed was suffocating. Closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of the decision threatening to crush him. We're already dead if we don't try, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He had no time to second-guess himself anymore. The lines had blurred between what was morally right and what was needed for survival, but survival was no longer enough. They had to stop the weapon, no matter the cost. He looked at, we do this, we stop it, or we die trying. Her gaze softened, but the resolve in her eyes was unwavering. Then let's finish it. With that, turned back toward the operations console, pulling up the ship's schematics for the final time. It wasn't just the shield generator they had to worry about anymore. It was the heart of SW's weapon, the fusion reactor deep within the command ship that could annihilate entire planets with a single strike. The problem was that even if they succeeded in deactivating the weapon's core, the blast radius of a destabilized fusion reactor was enough to erase everything within a 200-kilometer radius. They were about to face a choice far more profound than simply surviving the war. They were going to have to decide whether their mission mattered more than their lives. The battle outside intensified as fleet closed in and knew they couldn't wait any longer. "Where's the reactor?" demanded. "I need to know exactly where to hit." Looked up from the tactical screen, her face grim. "We've located it. The reactor's core is near the main command center, heavily fortified. It's going to take everything we've got to break through." The last barrier to the fusion reactor was a set of security doors that New would require precision and speed to breach. He couldn't afford mistakes. This was their only shot. "We'll breach it from the engineering deck," said, already pulling up the schematics of the ship's internal layout on his console. "I can reroute power to the hull, create a temporary gap in the defense system, but we're going to have a small window." Spoke up, her voice edged with anxiety. "What if we don't get through in time? What if?" "If we don't get through, then it's all over," interrupted, his voice hardening. "I'm not walking away from this." The determination in his voice silenced the room. They had come this far. There was no going back now. "Everyone prepare for a full assault," ordered. "You're with me. Take control of the ship's systems and keep us running." Followed down the narrow corridor, the air thick with the tension of imminent battle. He could hear the faint rumble of explosions from outside as fleet pounded the ship's hull. But his focus was sharp. He didn't have the luxury of worrying about anything else. As they reached the engineering deck, moved to the main control panel, his fingers flying across the interface, rerouting power to the ship's most critical systems. He could feel the weight of the countdown ticking down inside his mind. The reactor was only moments away from becoming unstable. "I'm initiating the breach," shouted as he triggered the override sequence. The ship groaned in response, and could hear the alarms flare to life. The massive doors leading to the reactor core began to grind open, the sound deafening in the silence that had settled over the crew. The final challenge stood before them. The reactor core was in sight, and it was surrounded by a heavily armed security force. There was no way to avoid a firefight. "We push through," said, unsheathing her blade. "Now." Grabbed his weapon, ready for the fight. The air was thick with anticipation, and the crew was braced for what was about to come. As they stormed forward, the ship's last-ditch defenses kicked in, automatic turrets, energy shields, and blast doors locking them in place. It was chaos. And then, the first wave of forces came into view. The explosion that rocked the ship sent crashing to the floor. His head slammed against the cold metal of the ship's corridor, the world spinning around him. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. His vision blurred, and the sounds of chaos seemed to drown out everything else. But then, through the ringing in his ears, he heard his voice, sharp and commanding. "Get up." The ship was in, every moment counted. Instincts kicked in, and he scrambled to his feet, his hand gripping the wall for support. His body screamed with pain from the cut on his side and the strain of the battle, but he pushed it aside. There was no time for weakness. Was already ahead of him, her eyes locked on the reactor room door. "The countdown is already running," she said. "We need to get inside, disable the core, and stop this ship from exploding." His mind raced. The ship's security had been completely compromised, and now the reactor was on the verge of detonating. Their only hope was to reach it before forces did, before the fusion core reached critical mass. "Wait," called, grabbing her arm. She turned, eyes narrowing. "What is it?" "We don't have time," he said. "We need to make a decision, and we need to make it fast. If I don't disable the reactor, we're all dead." His gaze hardened. She knew what meant. The only way to prevent the reactor from detonating was to sacrifice the core entirely. Had the skill to reroute the energy, but it would require him to enter the most volatile section of the ship and manually disable the fusion core. "I'll do it," said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty inside him. "I'll stabilize the core. You get everyone else to safety." But didn't move. "We're all in this together." For a moment they stood there in the midst of the chaos, the sound of the ship groaning in the distance, the countdown ticking down. Could feel the weight of the decision pressing on his chest. If he failed, it wouldn't just be his life on the line, it would be the lives of everyone on this ship. And if he succeeded, he wasn't sure what kind of future they'd have left. "I'm not leaving you behind," said, her voice low but determined. "We'll do this together." Nodded, understanding the weight of her words. They had fought side by side throughout this war. Now they would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. With a final glance toward the blast doors leading into the reactor room, led the way, his mind focused on the one thing that mattered, stopping his weapon from reaching full power. The moment they entered the room, his eyes were drawn to the massive reactor at the center of the room. The core was pulsating with raw energy, a glowing, volatile mass that thrummed with destructive potential. The countdown was dangerously close to zero. "We need to shut it down now," shouted, moving toward the core's main control panel. His fingers flew over the console, trying to find a way to reroute the power. But the system was locked down tight. "We're too late," said, her voice full of dread. "It's going to blow." "No," yelled, "there's still a chance." He dove into the main wiring panel, tearing open the access hatch to expose the reactor's inner circuits. The room around them trembled as another round of enemy fire hit the ship's hull. The temperature was rising rapidly. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked, his hands moving faster than he thought possible. "You're running out of time," called, her voice tight with anxiety. His heart raced as he began to reroute the reactor's energy. He could feel the heat intensifying and the glow of the reactor grew brighter. But his fingers were steady and his mind remained laser-focused on the task at hand. The core was unstable, but there was a chance he could trigger a. "Almost there," he muttered to himself, pushing the last wire into place. The reactor flickered, the hum of energy shifting, and then nothing. For a brief moment the room was silent. His breath hitched, but before he could allow himself any relief, the countdown resumed. "No," shouted, "it's not over, we need to stabilize it now." But the reactor was already too far gone. He could feel it deep in his bones, the energy was reaching critical mass. Cried, her voice filled with desperation, "We have to get out of here." Hesitated, he had made a choice, the one choice he could live with, but he knew the cost. He turned to, his voice steady, though it trembled with the weight of his decision. "You need to leave, now." Shook her head, taking a step toward him. "I'm not leaving you behind, we'll fight together." Smiled weakly despite the growing chaos. "No, you have to take the crew to safety." He could hear the sound of forces closing in, the rumble of their final assault breaking through the walls of the ship. There wasn't much time left. Stepped back, placing one last hand on the reactor's control panel. He had the knowledge to stabilize it, but the cost was too great. The overload had begun, and now there was only one way to stop the devastation. He reached for the detonator. "No," shouted, but it was too late. He pressed the button. A bright flash of light erupted from the core. The last thing saw was the explosion tearing through the room. And then there was nothing. Woke to the sound of voices, distant but familiar. The world around him was blurry, and his body ached with a pain he couldn't comprehend. His vision slowly focused, and he found himself lying on a bed in what looked like a makeshift medical bay. "He's awake." Blinked, his mind struggling to process the voices. He turned his head slowly, finding standing over him, her face drawn but relieved. "You did it," she said softly, her voice full of awe. "You stopped it." Tried to speak but found his throat too dry. The memories of the explosion flooded back, and he closed his eyes, trying to find peace in the knowledge that he had given everything for a cause greater than himself. "Where's the crew?" he rasped, his voice weak but insistent. Smiled, her eyes moist. "They're safe. You saved them. You saved all of us." Let out a long breath, his body still trembling with the aftermath of his actions. "And gone," replied. "The resistance has won thanks to you." His heart finally slowed, his breath steadying as he looked up at the ceiling. He had made the ultimate sacrifice. But in that moment, surrounded by the people he had fought alongside, he knew that his death, his choice, had made a difference. And in that difference, hope was born.